She was already 3 steps gone when his hand caught her arm. Not rough, but certain, the way a man grabs a rope that's sliding through his fingers and knows he only gets one chance. She spun around, eyes sharp as broken glass, ready to fight whoever thought they had the right. But Caleb Carter didn't look like a man claiming rights. He looked like a man who had just watched something irreplaceable walk past him, and couldn't explain why. Couldn't explain anything, except that letting her disappear into that crowd felt like a mistake he would spend the rest of his life paying for. So he didn't let her go. If this story already has your heart beating faster, you're in the right place. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a single chapter. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. The summer of 1879 had been the cruelest one Caleb Carter could remember. And that was saying something, because the frontier didn't deal in gentle seasons. 3 months without rain. 3 months of watching the grass turn from green to yellow to the color of old bone. 3 months of riding the fence lines of the Carter Ranch and counting what was left, which wasn't much. Cattle that had grown lean, wells that had dropped to nothing but mud and memory, and a father lying in the back bedroom of the ranch house, coughing through the nights, growing smaller by the week. Caleb had made the ride into Silver Mesa that evening for one reason alone. Dr. Hargrove had finally gotten in a new shipment of laudanum and fever tonic from Denver, and his father needed it badly enough that Caleb hadn't eaten since morning, so he could save the hour it would have taken to stop. He tied his horse outside the station, because the general store was right beside it, and he figured he'd pick up the medicine and be back on the road before the evening crowd even thinned. He figured wrong. The train from Denver was late, which wasn't unusual, and while Caleb waited on the steps of the general store, with his package tucked under one arm, the platform began to fill with people spilling out of the passenger cars. He wasn't paying them any particular attention. He was thinking about his father, about the drought, about the banknote that was due in October, and whether he'd have enough head of cattle to cover it without selling off the east pasture, which had been his mother's favorite piece of land, and which he had sworn, privately and fiercely, he would never let go. And then she stepped off the train. He almost missed her. She wasn't loud about it, didn't make an entrance, just appeared at the top of the iron steps, in a traveling coat the color of storm clouds, a single battered leather bag in one hand, and stood there for just a moment, like she was taking the measure of the town before she decided whether it was worth her trouble. Something about the stillness of it caught his eye. Most women who came off the eastern trains were nervous, clutching at husbands or brothers, eyes wide at the dust and the noise and the rough edges of a frontier town. But this one looked at Silver Mesa the way a general looks at a map, searching for every road in and every road out. Her hair was dark. Her jaw was set. And when she finally moved down the steps and her eyes swept the platform, just for a moment, just a single glance, they landed on Caleb Carter like an accusation. He had no idea why his hand tightened on the paper package under his arm. She looked away first. She moved into the crowd, and within seconds she was gone, swallowed by the noise and the bodies and the long shadows of the early evening. Caleb stood there for another 5 seconds, staring at the space she had occupied. Then he shook his head, turned around, and went home. He told himself he'd forgotten about her by the time he reached the ranch. He told himself that all the way through the evening, through giving his father the medicine, through heating up the leftover stew on the iron stove, through sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee gone cold, while the wind pushed hard against the shutters, and the house made his familiar sounds of settling and groaning. He told himself he wasn't thinking about her. He was a poor liar. His ranch hand, Hector Vega, A wiry man in his 40s who had worked the Carter land since before Caleb was born, and who had opinions about everything and never kept them to himself, noticed immediately. "You look like a man who forgot to do something important," Hector said, dropping into the chair across the table without being invited. "What'd you forget?" "Nothing," Caleb said. "Uh-huh." Hector poured himself a cup of coffee. "How's your father?" "Better tonight. The medicine helped." "Good." A pause. "So then, why do you look like that?" "Like what?" "Like somebody showed you a door you didn't know existed, and then locked it before you could walk through." Caleb looked at him. "You say things like that, and then wonder why people don't invite you to dinner." Hector grinned. "I get invited to dinner. I just don't always go." He leaned back in his chair. Something happened in town. It wasn't a question. Caleb was quiet for long enough that Hector took it as an answer. "A woman," Hector said. "I don't want to talk about this." "A woman on the train, I'd guess, since that's the only thing that comes into Silver Mesa on a Tuesday evening that could put that particular look on a man's face." Caleb stood up and put his cup in the wash basin. "Good night, Hector." Hector was still grinning when Caleb walked out of the kitchen. 3 days passed. Caleb did not go back into town. He had plenty of reasons not to. The north fence line needed mending. 2 of his breeding cows were showing signs of sickness and needed watching. His father had a bad night on Wednesday and a worse one on Thursday, and Caleb sat up through both of them, listening to the old man's labored breathing and thinking about all the things that would fall to him when the time came. He did not think about the woman on the platform. He was extremely committed to not thinking about her. And then Friday came, and he needed supplies, and there was no getting around the fact that the general store was the only place within 40 miles that carried what he needed. He tied up his horse. He walked through the door. He picked up what was on his list. He carried it to the counter. And there she was. She was standing 3 feet away, arguing with Jonas Briggs, who ran the store, and who was not accustomed to being argued with, least of all by a woman who had only been in town for 3 days and already seemed to know exactly how much everything should cost. "The price you quoted me yesterday was $12 for the fencing wire," she was saying, her voice even and clear as well water. "Today, it's 15. Either your memory is failing you, Jonas, or you've decided to try something I'd strongly advise against." Jonas, a stout, red-faced man who prided himself on his authority, turned the color of a ripe beet. "Now see here, Miss Whitmore," she said. "Eliza Whitmore. And I'm not a miss. I'm a business principal, which means I keep records of every conversation I have about money, including the one I had with you yesterday at 11 in the morning, which I wrote down the moment I walked out that door." She reached into the inside pocket of her coat and produced a small notebook. $12. Your words, your price." There was a long silence in the store. Every person in it was pretending to look at something else. Jonas cleared his throat. "Well, I may have misspoken. Then let's misspeak our way back to $12, Eliza said pleasantly, "and we can all get on with our morning." Another silence. Jonas looked at the notebook, then at her face, then at the notebook again. $12, he muttered. "Thank you." She put the notebook away, picked up her parcel, and turned toward the door, and stopped. Because Caleb Carter was standing 2 feet in front of her, holding a sack of grain, and staring at her with an expression he sincerely hoped didn't look as struck as it felt. Their eyes met for the second time. Up close, he could see that hers were a particular shade of gray, not cold, but serious. The eyes of someone who had learned a long time ago that the world didn't hand you things and had made their peace with it. "Excuse me," she said, moving the step around him. "You bought the Hollow Creek place," he said. He didn't plan to say it. It just came out. She stopped, turned back, looked at him with
This
something
story
that
was
wasn't
posted
quite
on the channel The
surprise
Rusty
and
Saddle.
wasn't quite
Please do not
suspicion,
repost it in
but
any
was somewhere
form.
in between. How do you know that? Word travels fast out here, he said, especially when somebody buys a piece of land that's been sitting empty for 4 years. She studied him for a moment. And who are you? Caleb Carter. My land runs the northern border of Hollow Creek. About a mile of shared fence line between us. Something shifted in her expression. Slight, but real. Carter Ranch, she said, like she was placing it on a map in her head. I've heard of it. Good things, I hope. Useful things, she said. Which was, he would come to understand, exactly how Eliza Whitmore gave a compliment. She looked at him for another second, that same measuring look she'd given the town from the top of the train steps. Then she said, I have a lot of work to do, and walked past him and out the door. Caleb stood there with his sack of grain. Hector, who had apparently materialized out of thin air somewhere to his left, said quietly, There's the door again. Not now, Hector. I'm just saying, not now. He rode out to the Hollow Creek property the next morning. He told himself it was a neighborly thing to do. Whoever had bought that land was going to need information about the water sources, the grazing patterns, the weak spots in the soil that turned to mud in spring and cracked to nothing in summer. It was practical. It made sense. He told himself all of that on the 40-minute ride north. He found her standing in the middle of what had once been the main pasture of Hollow Creek Ranch, wearing work clothes and boots that had seen better days, staring at the ground with the intensity of someone who was having a very serious argument with it. The soil here, she said, without looking up, has been overworked. Whoever ran this place before didn't rotate the grazing. He pulled up his horse. Thomas Elkins ran it. Good man, bad planner. Ran the same cattle over the same ground for 12 years, and then acted surprised when the grass gave out. She finally looked up at him. What happened to him? Moved his family to Kansas City. Couldn't make the note. He swung down from the saddle. He wasn't the only one the drought hit hard, but he was the only one who didn't have a neighbor willing to help him rotate his stock. She tilted her head. And why didn't he have that neighbor? Because Elkins was too proud to ask. A beat of silence. Seems like a lonely way to fail, she said. It was. He looked out over the dry pasture. You're planning to run cattle? I'm planning to run a productive agricultural operation, she said. Cattle a part of it. Possibly grain. I have to evaluate the water situation first. The creek's still running, he said. Low right now because of the drought, but it's spring-fed further up. Doesn't dry out completely. That's the reason this land has value, even when everything else around it looks dead. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her filing that away. You know this land well, she said. I know every piece of ground within 20 miles of my ranch, he said. When you depend on the land to survive, you learn it the same way you learn a person. Its moods, its habits, what it'll give you and what it won't. She looked at him then, really looked at him, in a way that was different from before, not calculating, something more open. I have a lot to learn, she said quietly. And the way she said it told him that admitting that cost her something. That's not a weakness, he said. That's the start of knowing what you're doing. He came back the following week, and the week after that. He told himself each time that it was practical. There was the fence line to discuss. Some of the posts on the shared border had rotted out and needed replacing, and that was a legitimate reason to ride over. Then there was the question of the water rights for the creek, which had to be understood before she committed to any particular herd size. Then there was the issue of the old stock pond in the eastern edge of her property, which could be restored with some basic work, but which had a drainage problem he could show her faster than he could explain it. Practical. Every visit, entirely practical. The conversations that lasted 2 and 3 hours at a stretch, those were harder to explain away. She was unlike anyone he had ever spent time with. Not because she was from the East, though she was. Not because she was educated, though that was clear in everything she said, but because she thought the way he did, in straight lines, without ornamentation, always circling back to the thing that actually mattered. She didn't waste words. She didn't perform opinions she didn't hold. And when she didn't know something, she said so, and then she went and found out. One afternoon, riding the eastern fence line together, she said, "Tell me about your father." It surprised him. "What do you want to know?" "What kind of man he was, before he got sick." Caleb was quiet for a moment. The kind of man who could walk into a room full of strangers and make every one of them feel like he'd been waiting to meet them specifically. He had a way of seeing people clearly, not what they said they were, what they actually were. He paused. "It was a gift I didn't inherit." "I don't think that's true," she said. He glanced at her. "You see clearly," she said. "You just don't always say what you see." He didn't answer that. But he felt it settle in his chest, like something true. "What about your father?" he asked. The silence that followed was longer than his. "My father," she said finally, "is the reason I'm here." She told him the truth on a Thursday evening, sitting on the split-rail fence outside the Hollow Creek barn while the sun went red and long behind the mountains. Her father's company, Whitmore Agricultural Partners, based in Philadelphia, had been one of the most respected firms of its kind in the eastern states. Land investment, agricultural development. 30 years of reputation built on honest dealing and sound judgment. And then the wrong loan, at the wrong time, from the wrong man. Victor Hawthorne. The name came out of her mouth like something she'd been carrying for a long time, without setting down. "He's a financier," she said. "What that really means is that he finds companies in trouble and offers them lifelines that are actually nooses. By the time my father realized what he'd signed, Hawthorne owned 40% of the company's outstanding debt and had enough leverage to dictate terms." "What kind of terms?" Caleb asked. Eliza looked out at the horizon. "The kind that require us to expand into Western land development within the year or forfeit a controlling interest in the firm. He provided the capital for this venture." A pause. "With conditions." "What conditions?" She was quiet long enough that he knew what was coming wasn't easy. "If this operation doesn't show a profit margin within 12 months, she said, Hawthorne takes the ranch, and the company, and everything my father spent 30 years building." Caleb was quiet. "That's not all," she said, and her voice was steady, but just barely. "His son, Marcus Hawthorne, has been courting me for 2 years. Victor made it clear, in language just polished enough to deny later, that a marriage between his son and myself would solve the debt problem entirely." The words landed in the air between them. Caleb felt something hard and cold move through him. "He's trying to buy you." "He's trying to buy the company through me," she said. "Which is worse, if you think about it, because it means I'm not even the prize. I'm just the mechanism." She didn't say it with self-pity. She said it with the flat, clear anger of someone who had stared at a situation long enough to see it exactly as it was. "And your father?" Caleb asked. "My father is dying," she said, simply, without drama. Not quickly, But his heart is failing, and he knows it. And the only thing keeping him awake at night, the only thing, is the thought that everything he built will be stripped apart by Victor Hawthorne the moment he closes his eyes.
This story was
She turned
posted
and
on the
looked at
channel
Caleb
The
directly.
Rusty Saddle. Please do
So
not
I came
repost
west,
it in any form.
because this was the only move left on the board. If I can make this ranch profitable, I can buy back enough of the debt to remove Hawthorne's leverage. And if I can do that before the year is out... She stopped. Then maybe my father can rest. Caleb looked at her for a long time. "How much time do you have?" he asked. 9 months, she said. As of today, exactly 9 months. The sun dropped behind the mountains. Caleb said, "Then we'd better get started." She looked at him like he'd said something in a language she hadn't expected to hear. "I work alone," she said. "That's been working well so far?" A flash in those gray eyes. "I've been here 3 weeks. And in 3 weeks, you've gotten into an argument with the man who controls your supply chain, offended 2 of the local ranchers who could be your biggest allies, and ordered fencing wire that's the wrong gauge for the soil conditions out here." He kept his voice easy, but he held her gaze. "I'm not saying that to be unkind. I'm saying it because every one of those mistakes is fixable. But only if you let somebody who knows this territory help you fix it." The silence stretched out. "Why?" she said finally. "Why what?" "Why would you help me? You don't know me. I'm a competitor, technically. My operation doing well doesn't benefit you." "Your operation failing doesn't benefit me either," he said. "Bad ranching on that land affects the watershed, affects the grazing patterns, affects the whole valley." He paused. "And maybe I just don't like watching somebody fight a battle alone when they don't have to." She studied him. "That's a very convenient answer," she said. "It's the honest one," he said. Another long pause. "I won't be managed," she said. "I make my own decisions. I wouldn't want it any other way. And I won't be..." She stopped, started again. "I won't be indebted to you. If this works, it works because both of us put something real into it. Equal footing." "Equal footing," he agreed. She held out her hand. He shook it. And something shifted between them. Something neither of them would name for a long time, but that both of them felt, standing there in the last light of a Thursday evening, with the mountains going purple behind the hills, and the wind carrying the smell of coming rain across the dry Colorado earth. Something that felt, despite everything, like the beginning of something solid. In the weeks that followed, Silver Mesa watched the Carter man and the Whitmore woman with the deep, dedicated attention that frontier towns reserve for the most interesting developments of any given season. Opinion was divided. Agnes Beaumont, who ran the boarding house and considered herself the unofficial keeper of the town's moral ledger, told anyone who would listen that it was highly irregular and she didn't know what Caleb Carter was thinking, and furthermore, she hoped he was thinking at all. Tom Rafferty, who ran the feed and seed and had known Caleb since the boy could barely see over the counter, said it was about time that kid found something to care about besides fence posts and breeding records. Hector Vega, when pressed, simply said, "I told him about the door," and refused to elaborate further. And Caleb and Eliza, largely unaware of any of it, worked. They worked in a way that Caleb had not worked since he was young, and his father was healthy, and the ranch was humming, and the world felt full of possibility instead of weight. They rode the land at dawn, mapping the grazing rotation. They drove to the next county to look at a new strain of Hereford cattle that was showing better drought resistance. They spent an entire afternoon on their hands and knees beside the creek, testing the soil composition where the water ran, arguing cheerfully about drainage patterns until Eliza said something that changed his thinking entirely. And he said so, and she looked at him like she hadn't quite expected that. "Most men don't admit when they're wrong," she said. Most men don't have to work this hard to be right in the first place, he said. I can afford to be wrong when I'm working next to someone smarter. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not smarter, she said. I just know different things. That's what I said, he said. And she laughed, a real laugh, sudden and warm, that startled both of them. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. He was very sure in that moment that it would not be the last time he caused it. But nothing on the frontier stays easy for long. 2 weeks later, a rider came into Silver Mesa with a letter from Denver. It was addressed to Eliza Whitmore. She read it on the steps of the post office, and Caleb, who happened to be walking past, saw her face change. Not break. Eliza Whitmore did not break. But something in her went very still, the way the air goes still in the seconds before a storm hits and the whole world seems to hold its breath. What is it? He asked. She folded the letter precisely and put it in her coat pocket. Hawthorne is sending a representative out in 6 weeks, she said, to assess the progress of the operation. 6 weeks, he said. 6 weeks. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, which was that 6 weeks was not enough time to have anything that would satisfy a man like Victor Hawthorne, who wasn't actually looking to be satisfied. Caleb looked at the letter folded in her pocket. He's hoping to catch you failing, he said. Yes, she said. Then we make sure he catches us succeeding. She looked up at him, and in her eyes, under the worry and the steel and the fierce, quiet determination, was something he hadn't seen there before. Something that looked, just for a moment, very much like trust. 6 weeks. Every morning before first light, every evening past dark. Fence lines strengthened. Grazing rotation established. The old stock pond on the eastern edge cleared out and refilled by redirecting one of the creek's secondary channels. Something Caleb had spent 3 evenings calculating, and Eliza had improved upon with a modification that was so obvious once she said it that he couldn't understand why he hadn't seen it first. The Hereford cattle settled into the new rotation like they'd always known it. The pasture grass, given the rest it had been denied for years, began to push back up through the cracked earth. Thin at first, then thicker, then green enough that on certain mornings, riding out in the early light, you could almost believe the drought hadn't happened. Almost. And then, on a Wednesday evening in late August, Caleb came back to the main Hollow Creek barn to find Eliza sitting on a hay bale with the account books open across her knees and her head in her hands. Eliza! She looked up. Her eyes were dry. She wasn't a woman who cried often. He had learned that much. But her face held the particular exhaustion of someone who had just found out something they weren't ready to hear. Tell me, he said. The original capital Hawthorne provided, she said. I went through the fine print again tonight. There's a clause I missed. She held out the contract. The assessment in 6 weeks. It's not just a progress review. If his representative determines that the operation is not on track to produce a minimum yield by year's end, he has the legal right to withdraw funding immediately. Not just reduce it, remove it entirely. Caleb took the contract, read it. If he removes it now, she said quietly, I can't make payroll for the workers back east. I can't keep the ranch operating. I lose everything in a single move. And he knows it. And he built this clause in from the beginning because he never intended for this to work. The words hung in the air between them. Caleb folded the contract and handed it back to her. He never intended for you to succeed, Caleb said. No, she said. He intended for me to fail, cleanly enough that he could acquire everything my father built without anyone being able to say it wasn't legal. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. I came all the way out here to give my father a chance, and I walked right into the trap without seeing it." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're not in the trap yet." "Caleb, listen to me." He crouched down so they were at eye level.
This story was posted on the
He has a
channel The
6-week
Rusty Saddle.
assessment.
Please do
We
not
have 6
repost it in
weeks.
any form.
The question isn't whether we can show him what he wants to see. The question is whether we can build something real enough and documented well enough that even his own representative can't dismiss it. She looked at him. "And if we can't? Then we figure out the next move," he said. "But we don't lose this fight in an empty barn on a Wednesday night before we've even taken the field." Something moved through her expression. That complicated, layered thing that wasn't quite hope and wasn't quite relief, but was somewhere in between. "Why do you keep doing this?" she said softly. "Doing what?" "Standing next to me when you don't have to." He looked at her for a long moment. "I keep asking myself the same question," he said honestly. And the silence that followed was the kind that says more than words do. The kind that two people only let exist between them when they've stopped pretending they don't already know the answer. Outside, the Colorado night pressed in close and full of stars. The creek ran in the darkness, low and steady and alive. And in the Hollow Creek barn, with the account book spread open and the contract folded, and 6 weeks standing between them and everything that mattered, Caleb Carter and Eliza Whitmore sat together in the way that people who are fighting the same battle sit. Shoulder to shoulder, neither of them speaking, both of them thinking. And somewhere in the warm silence of that August night, without a word being said about it, the distance between neighbor and partner quietly and permanently closed. The man Hawthorne sent was named Gerald Fitch. He arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 days ahead of schedule, which told Caleb everything he needed to know about the man's intentions before he'd even opened his mouth. Men who come early to an assessment aren't looking for a fair picture. They're looking to catch the frame before you've had time to hang it straight. Fitch was lean, clean-shaved, and carried a leather briefcase that had never once been set down in mud. He wore the kind of suit that said Eastern Money the same way a brand says ownership. He stepped off the buckboard at Hollow Creek's gate, looked at the property with the slow, deliberate appraisal of a man who has already decided what he thinks and is merely confirming it, and said, without greeting either of them, "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Hawthorne sends his regards." "It's a 3-day early arrival," Eliza said pleasantly. "Tell me, do his regards come with an explanation, or are we skipping that part?" Fitch smiled the way a door closes. "I prefer to see operations in their natural state, before preparations are made." "Everything you're looking at is its natural state," Eliza said. "We didn't know you were coming early because you didn't tell us. Which means this is exactly what we look like every morning." Caleb stood slightly behind her left shoulder and said nothing. He had learned in the past 2 weeks that Eliza Whitmore handled men like Fitch better when given room. And the best thing he could do was be present enough to matter and quiet enough to let her work. Fitch opened his briefcase, pulled out a sheaf of papers, and began walking the property with the air of a judge doing a sentencing. He examined the pasture rotation records. He counted the cattle. He crouched beside the stock pond and tested the water level with a stick, then wrote something in his ledger that he did not share. Caleb watched him write it and felt the first cold wire of real worry move through him. "He's not here to evaluate," Caleb said quietly to Eliza when Fitch moved to the far end of the east pasture. "He's here to build a case." "I know," she said, not looking at him. "Whatever he writes in that ledger today is going to Denver by the end of the week." "I know that too." "Eliza, Caleb." She turned to look at him then, and her voice was steady, but her eyes were sharp with something urgent. "I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it without asking why right now." "What?" "Ride back to your ranch and get the breeding records. All of them. The ones going back to before the drought. And bring them here before Fitch finishes his walk." He looked at her. "Those are Carter Ranch records. They don't have anything to do with—" "They will," she said. "Trust me." He trusted her. He rode hard. He was back in 40 minutes, with the records box strapped behind his saddle. Fitch was seated at the outdoor table Eliza had set up. She had produced coffee and a clean ledger of her own, which she laid open in front of him with the composure of a woman who had spent years in boardrooms full of men who underestimated her. "These," Eliza said, sliding Caleb's records across the table alongside her own, "are the combined operational records of Hollow Creek Ranch and Carter Ranch, which are operating as a coordinated grazing partnership for the current season." Fitch looked at the records, then at Caleb, then back at Eliza. "A partnership? That isn't in the original venture documentation." "No," she said, "it isn't, because I formed it after I arrived, once I assessed the most efficient path to viability. The agreement gives us access to Carter's proven breeding stock rotation, his established supplier relationships, and shared grazing on the northern pasture during drought months." She let that settle. Combined, the two operations show a trajectory that, by Mr. Hawthorne's own metrics, indicates a productive yield by the end of the contract year. Fitch was quiet for a long moment, reading. Caleb sat down across from him and said nothing, which was harder than it sounded. "These cattle numbers," Fitch said finally. "The projected yield here. This assumes the drought breaks." "No," Eliza said. "It assumes the drought continues and still produces this yield. The column on the right is the drought projection. The column on the left is the standard projection. Both show the minimum threshold." Another long silence. Fitch closed the records. "I'll need to verify these figures with Mr. Hawthorne's accounting team," he said. "Of course," Eliza said. "I've prepared copies." She slid a second set of documents across the table. Fitch stared at them, and in the slight tightening around his mouth, Caleb saw something that looked very much like a man who had arrived to deliver bad news and found it had been taken out of his hands. Fitch left by early afternoon. The moment the buckboard rounded the bend and disappeared from sight, Caleb let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding since Tuesday morning. "That was the most dangerous hour I've spent in recent memory," he said. "He'll go back to Hawthorne and tell him the numbers look defensible," Eliza said. She was still watching the road where Fitch had gone. "Which means Hawthorne will try a different approach." Caleb looked at her. "What kind of different approach?" She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know yet," she said. "But Victor Hawthorne did not become what he is by accepting no for an answer. He'll come at this from another direction." She paused. "He always does." The other direction arrived 2 weeks later in the form of a letter. Not to Eliza, to Caleb. It came through the Silver Mesa post office on a Friday morning, sealed with a wax stamp that had the Hawthorne firm's emblem pressed into it. The kind of detail that was meant to be noticed. Caleb broke the seal standing at the post office counter, read it once, then read it again more slowly. Then he folded it and put it in his shirt pocket and rode to Hollow Creek without stopping anywhere in between. He found Eliza in the barn, working through the supply inventory with the focus she brought to everything. Pencil moving, lips slightly pressed together, not looking up until she heard his boots on the floor. She looked up, read his face. "What happened?" she said. He pulled the letter from his pocket and held it out. She read it. He watched her face as she did, watched the careful stillness that meant she was controlling her reaction rather than not having one. She folded it and handed it back. "He offered to buy you out," she said. It wasn't a question. "3 times what my land is worth," Caleb said. "Cash. Immediate transfer. And if you sell, your shared grazing rights end. Your partnership agreement ends."
This story was posted
Your
on the
numbers
channel
lose
The
the
Rusty
combined
Saddle.
projection.
Please do not repost it in
Paused.
any form.
Your operation fails the next assessment on its own. Eliza set down her pencil. "He figured out the weak point," she said quietly. "He went around you," Caleb said. "Came straight at me instead. Figured I might be easier to move." She looked at him directly. "Are you?" "No," he said simply. The word landed in the air between them without drama or decoration, just clean and flat and true. Something moved through her face, relief, then something more complicated. "Caleb, this is your father's land. The money he's offering, I know what it's worth. It would pay every note you have outstanding, and then some. You could—" "I know what it would do," he said. "And I know what selling it would do. To you. To this." He stepped forward and put the letter on the inventory table beside her. "I want you to know he tried, and I want you to know it didn't work." She looked at the letter, then at him. "Why?" she said, not challenging, genuinely asking. "Because some things matter more than the offer," he said, and the simplicity of it was so unguarded, so plainly honest, that it clearly cost him something to say it. The barn was quiet. Outside, the wind picked up and rattled the old boards, and the cattle shifted in the pasture. And somewhere up the creek, a bird called once and went silent. "You should go home," Eliza said softly. "It's getting late." "Eliza, not because I want you to go," she said, and her voice was careful now, the way someone is careful when they're walking on ground they're not sure of. "Because if I say what I want to say right now, I'm not sure I'll be able to keep the line between us that I need to keep." He understood what she was saying. He didn't like it, but he understood it. "All right," he said. He picked up his hat from the post where he'd hung it, walked toward the door, stopped. "For what it's worth," he said, without turning around, "I'm not interested in keeping that line." And then he walked out before she could answer. The next morning she came to him. She rode up to the Carter ranch house just after sunup and tied her horse to the post and knocked 3 times. And Caleb answered the door, still pulling on his second boot, with the look of a man who had not slept as much as he needed to. "We need to talk," she said. "I know," he said. "Not about last night," she said quickly. "Then what?" "I got a letter this morning, not from Hawthorne." She held it out. "From my father's lawyer." He took it and read it standing in the doorway. His father's deterioration, the accelerated timeline, the fact that Hawthorne's legal team had filed a preliminary motion in the Philadelphia courts, challenging the terms of the original debt agreement, a move that, if it succeeded, would shift the repayment schedule by 6 months and trigger the default clause on the ranch without any assessment at all. They were trying to win in the courtroom what they couldn't win on the land. "How long does the lawyer think they have?" Caleb said. "Weeks," Eliza said. "Not months." He handed the letter back. "Then we move faster," he said. "You can't move faster through a court proceeding." "No," he said, "but we can change what there is to fight over." He looked at her carefully. "Eliza, sit down." She came inside, sat at the kitchen table, accepted the cup of coffee Hector appeared from nowhere to provide. Hector, who then disappeared with supernatural tact back into whatever part of the house he haunted. Caleb sat across from her. "I've been thinking about this since the letter came," he said. "Since before that, if I'm being honest. There's a move here that protects the ranch, removes Hawthorne's leverage on the property itself, and changes the legal standing of the entire operation." She was watching him carefully. What move? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "If the ranch is jointly owned by a married couple, Hawthorne can't seize Eliza Whitmore's property on the basis of her company's debt. He'd have to prove both partners' assets are implicated, and he can't do that because my finances are separate from your company's obligations." She went very still. "What I'm saying," he said carefully, "is that legally, on paper, if you and I were—" "I understand what you're saying," she said. The kitchen was very quiet. "Caleb," she said, and her voice was low, "that is not a small thing." "I know. You'd be tying your name, your ranch, your father's legacy, to a legal battle that could go on for years." "Yes. And to me," she said, "specifically, to whatever this is." She made a small gesture between them that encompassed everything neither of them had said directly in the weeks they'd been working side by side, and everything they'd both known anyway. "A woman you've known for less than 2 months." "I know how long I've known you," he said. "I know it's not traditional," he said. "And I know it's not the way people are supposed to come to this kind of decision. And I know you didn't come out here looking for—" He stopped, started again. "But I also know what I know, Eliza. I know who you are. Not who you're trying to be, or what you're fighting for, or how you present yourself to a room full of people who want to see you fail. I know who you actually are. Because I've been watching you work for 6 weeks, and there isn't a pretense in you." He held her gaze. "And that's not something that changes with more time." She looked at him for a long time. He watched something work its way through her, the calculation, the resistance, the fear that lived underneath the capability and the strength, the fear that said trusting someone completely had a cost she'd already paid once and wasn't sure she could pay again. "This isn't how I imagined this," she said finally. "I know. I imagined, if I ever—" She stopped, looked at her coffee cup. "I imagined something ordinary, something that built slowly, without a crisis attached to it." "So did I," he said honestly. "What if it doesn't work?" she said. "What if we do this, and Hawthorne finds another angle, and we've put everything on the line, and it still doesn't—" "Then we lose together instead of separately," he said. "And that's still better." Her eyes came back to his, and this time the thing in them wasn't calculation or resistance. It was the look of a woman deciding, fully and completely, to trust something she couldn't entirely prove yet. "Equal footing," she said quietly. "That was always the agreement." "It still is." She was quiet for another long moment. Then she put her coffee cup down on the table, set both hands flat on the wood, and said in a voice that was perfectly steady, "Then let's not lose." They were married 4 days later in the small Silver Mesa church on a Friday afternoon, with Hector Vega as witness and the Reverend's wife as the second, because the law required 2. Agnes Beaumont found out about it before the ink was dry on the certificate and told every person she encountered for the following week. Opinion in Silver Mesa shifted with the speed that small towns manage when something genuinely surprising gives them something real to discuss. Tom Rafferty sent over a bottle of good whiskey and a note that said simply, "About time." The Hollow Creek cattle operation continued without interruption. Eliza moved nothing from her side of the property, and Caleb moved nothing from his. The practical reality of their lives changed in the ways that mattered legally, and almost not at all in the ways that didn't, which suited them both, because what had grown between them had never needed ceremony to make it real. But the night after the wedding, sitting on the front step of the Hollow Creek house, with the stars spread enormous and the night air carrying the first faint edge of autumn chill, Eliza said, "I want to tell you something." "Tell me," he said. "Before I came here," she said, I had decided something, privately, a decision I'd made and not told anyone. She paused. I'd decided that, if this failed, the ranch, the company, all of it, I was going to accept Hawthorne's offer. Marcus, the marriage, all of it. Caleb was quiet. Not because I wanted to, she said, but because I couldn't see another way to protect my father's people. The workers, the ones who'd be left with nothing if the company collapsed. She looked out at the night. I was prepared to sacrifice the rest of my life to keep those people from losing theirs. Eliza, I need you to know that, she said, because when you offered to help me, when you kept coming back, I kept waiting for it to cost me something. Kept waiting for the moment where you'd want something I couldn't give, or need something that would make me smaller. She turned to look at him. And it never happened.
This story was posted on the
He looked at
channel
her.
The Rusty Saddle.
That's
Please
new for
do
you,
not repost
he
it
said
in any
quietly.
form.
Not a question. Yes, she said simply. He reached over and took her hand. She let him. It's new for me too, he said. The not being alone part. She turned her hand over and held his properly. They sat like that for a long time, with the night settling in around the Colorado mountains and the creek running steady in the dark, and the sound of the cattle shifting, and both of them thinking about what lay ahead. The trip east, the confrontation with Hawthorne, the battle that was still very much unwon. But right then, in that particular hour, neither of them said any of it out loud. Because some moments need to be left alone. And Caleb Carter, who had spent years being a man who held everything up by himself, sat in the quiet beside the woman he had married in a crisis and chosen in his heart long before that, and felt a particular, unfamiliar weight of something he had nearly stopped believing in. The weight of not being alone. The weight of someone choosing to stay. Outside in the darkness, the wind moved across the Colorado plain, and somewhere far off, a wolf called once into the open night. And the silence that came back was not empty. The train east left Silver Mesa on a Monday morning, and Caleb Carter had never in his life felt so far from home before he'd even left it. He sat across from Eliza in the passenger car, with the Colorado mountains still visible through the window behind her, shrinking with every mile. And he thought about his father, about Hector, who had run the ranch in his absence with the quiet competence of a man who had been doing it half his life, about the cattle, the fence lines, the creek running low but steady, about all the things that were rooted in that valley and could not come with him. Eliza was reading documents. She had been reading documents since before they boarded. She had a leather satchel full of them. Contracts, financial statements, the original debt agreement with Hawthorne's firm, the marriage certificate, the combined operational records from Hollow Creek and Carter Ranch. She read with total concentration, pencil in hand, occasionally making a note in the margin, occasionally setting something aside with a particular careful deliberateness that told him it was important. He watched her and thought, this is what she looks like when she's at war. Not frantic, not afraid. Focused in the way the dangerous people are focused. The way a rifle is a precise and considered thing, not a wild one. You should sleep, she said, without looking up. I'm not tired. You didn't sleep last night. Neither did you. She looked up then, the ghost of a smile. I was working. So was I. You were staring at the ceiling. That's how I work, he said. She held his gaze for a moment, that quiet, measuring look she'd been giving him since the first day in the general store, except that now it had something warmer running underneath it, something that hadn't been there in the beginning. Then she looked back down at her papers. Boston is going to be difficult, she said. I know. Not just Hawthorne. The environment, the people around him, his lawyers, his business associates, They'll all take one look at you and decide what you are before you open your mouth." "Let them," he said. "Caleb," she set down her pencil. "I'm not saying this to insult you. I'm saying it because the way they'll underestimate you is actually an advantage if you use it correctly. They'll expect a rough frontier rancher with no understanding of their world, which means anything you say that demonstrates otherwise will land twice as hard." He thought about that. "You've done this before. Walked into a room where they'd already decided what you were?" "Every room I've ever walked into east of the Mississippi," she said flatly. "What do you do?" "I let them finish deciding," she said. "And then I make sure the next thing I say is the only thing they remember from the meeting." He nodded slowly. "All right." "And one more thing." She reached into the satchel and produced a thin document he hadn't seen before. "I had this drawn up before we left. My lawyer drafted it 2 days ago." She slid it across to him. He picked it up and read it. It was a formal legal transfer. A 50% ownership stake in Whitmore Agricultural Partners, currently held by Eliza Whitmore Carter, being assigned to Caleb Carter as joint marital property. He looked up from the document. "If you walk into that boardroom as my husband with no stake in the company," she said quietly, "Hawthorne's lawyers will argue the marriage is a shield arrangement and challenge its validity. But if you walk in as a co-owner, even a recent one, you have legal standing that's much harder to dismiss." "You're making me a partner in your company?" he said. "I'm making you what you already are, in every way that matters," she said. "I'm just making the paperwork agree." He set the document down on his knee, looked at her for a long moment. "Equal footing," he said. "Equal footing," she said. He signed it, handed it back. She put it carefully in the satchel and went back to her documents. And Caleb looked out the window at the plains opening up around them, wide and flat and entirely different from the mountains he knew, and felt the particular sensation of a man who has stepped off solid ground into something moving, and found that the moving thing holds. Boston hit him like a physical force. Not the city itself, though the noise and the density of it were unlike anything the Colorado Territory had prepared him for. It was the quality of the air in those marble-floored rooms, the way money announced itself, not through wealth, but through manner, through the particular ease of men who had never once wondered whether they could afford to be comfortable. Victor Hawthorne's offices occupied the top 2 floors of a building on Tremont Street that had been designed specifically to make visitors feel small. High ceilings, dark wood, portraits of men on the walls who all shared Hawthorne's particular expression, the look of someone accustomed to being thanked for what they've taken. Eithorn himself was 63 years old, lean in the way that meant calculation rather than health, with silver hair and the kind of steady, practiced gaze that told you he had been reading people for a living for 4 decades, and was reading you right now, and filing what he found. He stood up when they were shown in, extended his hand to Eliza first, then looked at Caleb. "Mr. Carter," he said, "this is unexpected." "Most good things are," Caleb said, and shook his hand. Something registered in Hawthorne's eyes. Not quite surprise, but its close cousin. He had expected, Caleb understood immediately, a man who would stand behind Eliza in this room. A prop. A legal formality in boots and a good coat. He had not expected someone who would look back at him the way Caleb was looking at him now. They sat down. Hawthorne's lead lawyer, a thin man named Aldridge, who wore his authority like an ill-fitting jacket, opened a folder and said, "We've reviewed the assessment from Mr. Fitch. There are some concerns about the projected yield figures." "I'd be glad to address them," Eliza said, "though I notice the concerns you're raising aren't reflected in the metrics outlined in the original contract." The original contract didn't anticipate a joint operational agreement with an adjacent property, Aldridge said. No, Eliza said. It anticipated a successful operation, which is what we have. The success you're projecting is partly dependent on resources that aren't technically part of the Hollow Creek venture. My husband's ranch and Hollow Creek operate as a single integrated system, Eliza said calmly. My husband is now a co-owner of Whitmore Agricultural Partners as of 3 days ago.
This story was posted on the channel
resources
The
of both
Rusty Saddle.
properties are
Please do not
therefore
repost
directly
it in any
relevant.
form.
She produced the signed transfer document and slid it across the table. Aldridge picked it up, read it. His expression didn't change, but something in the set of his shoulders did. Eythorne said nothing. He was watching Caleb. Caleb was watching him back. You've been busy, Hawthorne said. To Eliza, technically, but his eyes didn't leave Caleb. We have, Eliza said. A pause. Then Hawthorne said, very mildly, May I speak with your husband alone for a moment, Eliza? Eliza looked at Caleb. Caleb gave her the smallest nod. She stood, collected her satchel, and walked out without a word. The walk of a woman who is choosing to trust something, and knows it, and is doing it anyway. The door closed. Hawthorne leaned back in his chair and studied Caleb with the open appraisal of a man who no longer sees any reason to perform civility. How much? Hawthorne said. Caleb kept his face still. I'm not sure what you're asking. How much would it take, Hawthorne said, for you to walk out of this venture? Sign over your stake in the company. Let this proceed as it was designed to proceed before your involvement complicated it. Before my involvement protected the ranch your firm was planning to seize, you mean? The word seize landed in the room with a particular weight. Hawthorne didn't flinch, but he recognized the use of it, the deliberate plainness of it, stripping away the legal language. You're a rancher from Colorado, Hawthorne said. You have no business in Eastern finance. No, Caleb agreed. I'm a rancher from Colorado. I understand land. I understand what something is worth when you've worked it, and what it's worth when someone else works it and hands you the earnings. He leaned forward slightly. I understand the difference between investing in something and just owning it. And I understand that what you've been doing with Eliza's father's company isn't investment. It's demolition. You built the failure in from the start. Hawthorne was quiet for a moment. You're smarter than you look, he said. Not an insult, a reassessment. Most people are, Caleb said. Another silence, longer this time. Whatever she's told you about the debt structure, she's told me exactly what the documents say, Caleb said. No interpretation, no drama, just the numbers and what they mean. He picked up the copy of the original debt agreement that Eliza had left on the table when she walked out. She had left it there deliberately, he understood now, because she'd known this conversation was coming. The clause on page 14, the one that gives you the right to withdraw capital on 60 days' notice if the operation falls below the minimum threshold. He set it down. Except the minimum threshold in your contract is defined by a metric you control the calculation for, which means you can set the minimum wherever you need it to be. Hawthorne looked at the document. That's not illegal, Hawthorne said. No, Caleb said. It's not. It's just what it is. He met the older man's eyes. And now we both know that I know what it is, which changes the conversation we're about to have. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Somewhere in the building, a clock struck the hour. Hawthorne looked at Caleb with an expression that had shed every layer of the social performance he'd been maintaining since they walked in. What was underneath it wasn't anger. It was something more like recognition. The look of a man who has spent decades winning through superior information, meeting someone who came to the table with their own. What do you want? Hawthorne said. A full accounting, Caleb said. Every fee, every compounded interest adjustment, every calculation made using that clause on page 14. We want it reviewed by an independent auditor. Not yours, not ours. One agreed upon by both parties. And if the audit finds everything in order, then we'll pay what's legitimately owed and not a cent more, Caleb said. And the rest of the debt gets restructured over 5 years at the original agreed rate, not the adjusted one your lawyers applied in the Third Amendment. Hawthorne studied him. And in exchange, Caleb continued, we don't take what we currently have to the Philadelphia courts, which would include the clause on page 14, the metric definition on page 21, and the letter your firm sent to my ranch in Colorado offering to purchase my land, which, in context, constitutes an attempt to deliberately destabilize a protected business arrangement. He paused. I had a lawyer look at that letter before we left Silver Mesa. The clock finished striking. Hawthorne said nothing for 11 seconds. Caleb counted them. Then the older man said, You came here prepared. My wife came here prepared, Caleb said. I just came here ready. The meeting that followed lasted 4 hours. Eliza was brought back in after 20 minutes. When she walked through the door and looked at Caleb and read the shift in the room, the way Hawthorne's lawyers were now sitting differently, more carefully, the way Aldridge had developed a particular careful politeness that hadn't been present before, she said nothing. She simply sat down, opened her satchel, and got to work. They went line by line through the debt agreement. Hawthorne pushed back on the audit, twice, and then a third time with a different argument. Each time, Eliza or Caleb calmly redirected to the documentation. Aldridge tried to reframe the Third Amendment as a standard adjustment. Eliza read the exact language of the original agreement back to him and asked him to explain the discrepancy. He couldn't. By the third hour, the lawyers on Hawthorne's side were consulting each other in lowered voices more than they were consulting their client. By the fourth hour, Hawthorne himself had gone quiet in a particular way, the way of a man who is calculating, not retreating, and who is deciding which losses he can afford. We'll agree to the audit, Aldridge said finally. Eliza looked at Hawthorne directly. And the restructure? A long pause. We'll need to review the specific terms, Aldridge said. Of course, Eliza said. We'll put them in writing before we leave Boston. She looked at Hawthorne one more time. He looked back at her, and in his expression, underneath the control and the calculation, was something she recognized because she'd seen it in mirrors. The look of someone who has worked very hard for a particular outcome and watched it become a different one entirely. You're not what I expected, Hawthorne said to her. I know, she said, and did not add anything to it. They ate dinner that night in the hotel restaurant because the fight had taken everything out of both of them, and neither of them wanted to do anything requiring effort until the morning. The food was better than anything Silver Mesa had to offer, and Caleb ate it with the steady, unshowy appetite of a man who had been running on nerves since Monday morning, and was only now allowing his body to remember it had needs. Eliza ate slowly, distracted, her eyes on something in the middle distance that wasn't in the room. Where are you? He asked. She blinked. Here, sorry. A pause. I was thinking about my father. He waited. He should know, she said. What happened today? He's been carrying this for 2 years, the fear of what Hawthorne would do to everything he built, and... She stopped. I want him to know that it's going to be all right. I want him to be able to rest. Her voice stayed level, but just barely. I don't know how much time he has, and I don't want him to spend whatever's left of it afraid. Caleb set down his fork. Can we see him tomorrow? He said. She looked up. He's in Philadelphia. It's another 3 hours by train. Then we take the morning train, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. You'd do that. Eliza, he's your father. She pressed her lips together once. The gesture she made, he had learned, when something moved her and she was deciding whether to let it show. Yes, she said quietly. We'll take the morning train. Thomas Whitmore was smaller than Caleb had imagined. He had pictured, from everything Eliza had said, a formidable man. Someone who had built a 30-year business
This story was
empire
posted
through
on the
force of
channel
will
The Rusty
and
Saddle.
careful
Please
judgment.
do not repost it in any form.
And the man in the chair by the window of the Philadelphia townhouse had been that man. You could still see it in the architecture of him, the set of his jaw, the directness of his eyes, the way he held himself upright despite what the months had taken. But he was diminished. And Eliza's face, when she saw him, did something Caleb had not yet seen it do. She crossed the room and held her father's hand and said, "We have good news, Papa." Thomas Whitmore looked past her to Caleb. "This is your husband," he said. His voice was thinner than it should have been, but its precision was intact. "Caleb Carter," Caleb said from the doorway. "Sir." "Come in," Thomas said. "Don't stand in the doorway like you're waiting for permission. You're my daughter's husband." "That's permission enough." Caleb came in and sat in the chair Eliza indicated, across from the old man, while she perched on the arm of her father's chair and kept hold of his hand. And then she told him. Everything. The assessment, Fitch's arrival 3 days early, the letter to Caleb, the marriage, the train east, the 4 hours in Hawthorne's boardroom, the audit, the restructure. Thomas Whitmore listened with his eyes closed for most of it. Not sleeping, absorbing, processing every detail with the careful attention of a man who had spent his life reading situations. When she finished, there was a long quiet. Then he said, "Page 14. "Yes," Eliza said. "I knew something was wrong with that clause," he said. "The night I signed it. I knew it, and I signed it anyway, because we had no other options." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been carrying that particular mistake for 2 years. "It's handled, Papa," Eliza said. "You don't have to carry it anymore." He opened his eyes and looked at Caleb. "You went into Victor Hawthorne's boardroom," he said, "and you made him agree to an audit." "Your daughter made him agree," Caleb said honestly. "I just made sure he understood the alternative was worse." Thomas studied him for a long, quiet moment. "Eliza has been fighting alone for a very long time," he said finally. "Since long before I got sick. I never found the right man to stand next to her. Most of them either wanted to lead her or wanted to be led." He paused. "You don't seem to want either." "No, sir," Caleb said. "What do you want?" "To get back to Colorado," Caleb said simply. "The cattle won't manage themselves." Thomas Whitmore looked at him for another moment. And then he laughed. A real, full laugh that clearly surprised even him, and that made Eliza's face do something Caleb had not yet seen it do in the presence of anyone else. It went soft. Completely, unguardedly soft. Thomas reached out and gripped Caleb's forearm with the grip of a man who had been stronger and was still not weak. "Take care of my daughter," he said. "She takes considerable care of herself," Caleb said, "but I'll be there while she does it." Thomas nodded once, slowly, like something that had been wound tight for a very long time had finally been released. "Good," he said. "Then I can rest." They took the evening train back to Boston. Eliza sat with her head on Caleb's shoulder for the first hour, not sleeping, not speaking. He didn't say anything either. Some things that need to settle in a person require silence the way crops require rain. You don't rush it, and you don't crowd it with noise. Eventually she said, "Thank you." You did the work, he said. Not for today, she said. For him. For going to Philadelphia and letting him see you. She lifted her head and looked at him in the low light of the evening car. He's been afraid, the way fathers are afraid when they see their children alone. Not the financial part. That was real, but that wasn't what kept him up at night. She paused. What kept him up was thinking I would spend my life fighting battles by myself because no one could stand the pace of me. Caleb thought about that. The pace of you, he said, is the only pace that's felt right to me since I met you. She held his gaze. Outside the window, the night moved past. Farms and small towns, and the spread of eastern sky. All of it utterly foreign to everything he knew, and none of it mattering in the least compared to the weight of her hand finding his in the darkness of the train car. We still have the audit, she said quietly, and the restructure negotiations, and the trip back, and then the rest of the season on the ranch. I know, he said. It's not finished. It never is, he said. That's the thing about a life. It's not finished until it's finished. She thought about that. Is that supposed to be comforting? She said. It's supposed to be true, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, It is, actually. And she put her head back on his shoulder, and the train carried them east through the dark toward the last of what Hawthorne could throw at them, and Caleb Carter. A man who had come to Boston with a sack of breeding records, and a signed marriage certificate, and not much else, closed his eyes and felt, for the first time in years, that the ground was solid beneath him. Even here, even in the East, even this far from everything he knew. Because the thing that made ground solid wasn't always the land itself. Sometimes it was who you were standing on it with. The auditor's name was Benjamin Marsh, and he was the kind of man who made both sides nervous, which was exactly why they'd agreed on him. He was 60 years old, built like someone had compressed a larger man into a smaller frame, and he had the particular reputation of a person who had never once in 30 years of independent financial review found what either party wanted him to find. He found what was there, nothing more, nothing less. And he presented it with the flat, undramatic delivery of someone who understood that the numbers were the argument, and his job was simply to read them aloud. Eliza had spent 2 days preparing for his review. She had the documents organized by date, by category, and by relevance to the specific clauses in dispute. Caleb had watched her work from across the hotel room table, reading, cross-referencing, occasionally holding 2 documents side by side and going very still in the way she did when something didn't align, and thought that whatever Hawthorne had expected when he built the trap in the original contract, he had not expected Eliza Whitmore to spend 2 years learning exactly how the trap was made. Marsh arrived on a Thursday morning and went straight to work without pleasantries. He sat at the conference table in the neutral office space they'd arranged. Not Hawthorne's building, not the hotel. A rented room in a law office on Congress Street, with both sets of documents stacked in front of him, and he began reading. Aldridge sat on one side of the table with 2 junior lawyers. Eliza and Caleb sat on the other. Nobody talked much. The room had the quality of a held breath. At the 2-hour mark, Marsh put down a document and said, without looking up, "Who calculated the minimum threshold figure for the 3rd quarter assessment?" Aldridge said, "That would be our firm's accounting department." "Using what base data?" A pause. "The original yield projections from the contract." "Which projections?" Marsh said. "The ones on page 6 or the amended ones appended in the 3rd modification?" Another pause. Longer. "The amended ones," Aldridge said. "And who authorized the amendment to the yield projections?" The silence this time had a different quality. Caleb felt Eliza's hand press once, briefly, against his arm under the table. He didn't move. "That would require checking the internal records," Aldridge said. "I'll need those records," Marsh said. He made a note, turned a page, kept reading. Caleb looked at Eliza. She was looking at the table. Her jaw was set in the particular way it got when she was holding something still that didn't want to be held still. "Eliza," he said, very quietly. "He found it," she said, just as quietly. "I know."
This story was posted on the channel
amendment
The
to the
Rusty
yield
Saddle.
projections on
Please do
page
not
6.
repost it in any form.
Those were the original numbers my father negotiated. If they changed them without authorization, the entire basis for the third quarter assessment is invalid, which means the minimum threshold Fitch was measuring against was a number Hawthorne's firm set unilaterally after the contract was signed. Caleb thought about that for a moment. "That's not just leverage," he said. "No," she said. "That's fraud." The word sat between them like something live. Marsh finished his preliminary review at 4 in the afternoon and asked both parties to return the following morning. That evening, Hawthorne sent a message to the hotel. Not through Aldridge, not through any lawyer. A personal note, handwritten, delivered by a young man in a house uniform who handed it to Caleb at the front desk with the manner of someone who has been told this is important and is hoping very much not to be the one still holding it. Caleb read it in the elevator going up to the room. Then he read it again. He opened the door, and Eliza looked up from the desk where she was still working, because Eliza Whitmore did not stop working because the business day had ended, and said immediately, "What?" He held out the note. She read it. She set it down. She was quiet for a long moment. "He wants to meet tonight," she said. "Just the two of us. No lawyers." "That's what it says." "He's never done that before," she said. "In 2 years of dealing with his firm, Victor Hawthorne has never once communicated directly with me. Everything goes through Aldridge." She looked at the note again. "He's scared." "Marsh found something he didn't expect," Caleb said. "He expected Marsh to find something," Eliza said. "He wouldn't have agreed to the audit if he thought it was clean. He expected Marsh to find something manageable, something we could negotiate around. And instead—" She stopped. "Instead, Marsh is asking who authorized the amendment," Caleb said. "Which means the answer is someone who wasn't authorized to authorize it," she said. "And Hawthorne is sitting in his house on Beacon Hill right now, calculating exactly what that exposure looks like in a Philadelphia courtroom." Caleb sat down across from her. "Do we go?" She looked at him. "Do you think we should?" "I think a man who's scared and willing to meet without lawyers is a man who's ready to end this on terms he can live with," he said. "Which means we might get more tonight than we get tomorrow after Marsh finishes. Or he's trying to get us to agree to something before Marsh finishes," she said. "Also possible," he said. She drummed her fingers once on the desk. "If we go together, both of us." "He asked for just the two of us." "He asked for no lawyers," she said. "He didn't specify my husband." She stood up. "Let's go." Victor Hawthorne's house on Beacon Hill was everything that his office building was, designed to make you feel the weight of what he had and you didn't. But at 9 o'clock in the evening, with most of the lights low, it had a different quality. Less fortress. More the house of a man who had spent a long time being powerful and was sitting alone in it tonight. He met them in the study. No staff. A fire going. 2 chairs already set across from his. He looked, for the first time since they'd arrived in Boston, like 63 years old. "Thank you for coming," he said. He said it like a man who knew how to say things like that, and meant it the same way. Eliza sat. Caleb sat beside her. Hawthorne poured himself a drink, didn't offer them one. Then changed his mind and offered. They declined. He sat down. "How bad is it?" Eliza said. Not cruel, just direct. Hawthorne turned his glass in his hands. The amendment to the yield projections, he said. It was authorized by my son. The room went still. Marcus, Eliza said. Yes. Hawthorne set down the glass. He managed the account for the first 18 months. He made an adjustment to the base projections that he believed would... He stopped. He told me it was a minor recalibration. I didn't review it personally. It reset the minimum threshold by 40%, Eliza said. Yes. Which made it mathematically impossible for the operation to pass the assessment without meeting a standard that wasn't in the original agreement. Yes. Caleb said nothing. He was watching Hawthorne the way he watched cattle, looking for the thing underneath the surface movement. You didn't know, Caleb said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine read. Hawthorne looked at him. Not the specifics, no. A pause. I knew the structure was aggressive. That was intentional. But the amendment... He shook his head once. Marcus acted without my direct authorization. That, Eliza said carefully, doesn't change what it is. No, Hawthorne agreed. It doesn't. The fire shifted. The room was very quiet. What are you asking for? Caleb said. Hawthorne looked at him with something that was almost relief. The relief of a man who has been circling a direct question for hours and is glad someone finally asked it plainly. I'm asking whether there's a resolution that doesn't involve the Philadelphia courts, Hawthorne said. Not for my sake. For my son's. He paused. Marcus is 26 years old. What he did was wrong. But it wasn't criminal in intention. It was arrogant and careless, and an attempt to impress me that went badly. He looked at Eliza. He was also, I think you should know, genuinely taken with you. His interest in a match between you wasn't entirely calculated. Eliza was quiet. I'm not telling you that to complicate things, Hawthorne said. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that not everything in this situation was as cold-blooded as it may have appeared. It appeared, Eliza said carefully, like a trap designed to take my father's company. The structure was designed to give me leverage, Hawthorne said. That's different from a trap. The amendment made it a trap. And I didn't know about the amendment. He picked up his glass again. That distinction may not matter to you. I understand that. It matters legally, Caleb said. It matters a great deal legally. Hawthorne looked at him. If you didn't authorize the amendment, Caleb said, then the clause on page 14 was applied against a threshold that was set without your authority, which means the entire basis for the capital withdrawal option is compromised. You can't invoke a clause that was triggered by an unauthorized adjustment. Hawthorne was very still. Your lawyers know this, Caleb said. That's why Aldridge went quiet this afternoon when Marsh asked the question. Yes, Hawthorne said. So what you're actually asking, Caleb said, is whether we'll accept a settlement that lets your son's name stay out of a courtroom. A long silence. Yes, Hawthorne said. That's what I'm asking. Eliza looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Eliza. And in the way that two people who have learned each other look, the full, unguarded exchange of two minds working the same problem. She asked him something, and he answered her without a word being spoken. She turned back to Hawthorne. Full discharge of the outstanding debt, she said. All of it. At the originally negotiated rate, not the adjusted one. No remaining obligation to Hawthorne Partners. No ongoing connection between your firm and Whitmore Agricultural Partners. Hawthorne absorbed that. That's everything, he said. Yes, she said. It is. In exchange for the audit findings staying in this room, she said. No Philadelphia court, no public record. The settlement is private, the terms are sealed, and Marcus Hawthorne's name is not attached to a frog finding. Another long silence. Hawthorne said, "You'd walk away from a judgment that would have given you damages on top of the debt discharge." "I'd walk away from another year of legal proceedings," Eliza said. "I have a ranch to run and a company to rebuild, and I would like to do both of those things without spending the next 12 months in courtrooms." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not doing this for Marcus. I'm doing it because my father's people need the company functional, and that doesn't happen while we're fighting in court."
This story
Hawthorne
was
looked at her
posted
for
on
a
the
long
channel The
moment.
Rusty Saddle. Please
"Your
do not
father raised
repost
you
it
well,"
in any form.
he said. "My father raised me to solve problems," she said. "This is a problem. I'm solving it." They left Hawthorne's house at 11 o'clock and walked 2 blocks in the October night before either of them said anything. Then Caleb said, "You could have pushed for the damages." "I know," she said. "You had him. He would have agreed." "Probably," she said. "But then we'd be in Boston for another year, while the lawyers argued over the number, and my father would spend that year waiting to find out if it was over." She kept walking. "The debt discharge is everything we came for. Taking more than that just means more time away from the ranch." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You made the right call," he said. "I know," she said simply. Then, after a beat, "Thank you for not arguing." "You didn't need me to argue," he said. "You needed me to be in the room." She stopped walking. He stopped with her. She turned and looked at him in the gas-lit Boston street, with the night cold and the city making its city sounds around them, and said, "I used to go into rooms alone. Every difficult room in my life. Alone." She paused. "I'd forgotten what it feels like to turn around and have someone there." He looked at her. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like the room is smaller," she said. "In the good way." And then, quickly, before either of them could make more of it than the moment required, she turned and kept walking. "Come on. We need to tell Marsh in the morning." Marsh accepted the withdrawal from audit proceedings with the philosophical equanimity of a man who had seen it happen many times before. Aldridge drafted the settlement agreement with the focused speed of a lawyer who is extremely relieved not to be going to court. And Hawthorne signed it the next afternoon without ceremony. The signature of a man honoring a debt, not celebrating a deal. When it was done, when the last page was signed and witnessed and the copies distributed, Eliza sat in the rented conference room on Congress Street and looked at the settlement document in her hands for a long, quiet moment. Then she set it in her satchel, closed the clasp, and looked at Caleb. "It's over," she said. "The Boston part," he said. Something crossed her face, not quite a smile, but the thing that precedes one. "The Boston part," she agreed. "Let's go home." They stopped in Philadelphia on the way back. Thomas Whitmore read the settlement document 3 times. He read it the way a man reads something he has been waiting 2 years to read. Slowly, deliberately, savoring each word the way you savor water after a long, dry stretch. When he finished, he set it in his lap and was quiet for a moment. "It's clean," he said. "Completely," Eliza said. "No remaining obligation?" "None." He closed his eyes, and the expression that moved across his face was one Caleb had never expected to see on a man he'd known less than 48 hours. It was the complete and total release of something that had been held for too long. The physical manifestation of a weight being set down after years of carrying it. "Papa," Eliza said softly. "I'm all right," Thomas said. He opened his eyes. They were bright, but steady. "I'm all right." He looked at Caleb. "You did this." "Eliza did this," Caleb said. "You both did it," Thomas said firmly. Don't be modest on my account. It doesn't suit men who can sit across from Victor Hawthorne and come out the other side with a clean paper. He reached out and gripped Caleb's hand again. The same grip as before, strong despite everything. I've been asking for years what kind of man would be right for my daughter. I asked the wrong question. The right question was, what kind of man would she choose? He looked between them. Now I know the answer. Eliza, who had been holding herself together with the particular composure she always maintained in front of challenges, did something she almost never did. She cried. Briefly, quietly, turning her face slightly as if to give herself privacy in a room with no privacy in it. Caleb said nothing. He didn't reach for her or draw attention to it. He simply waited, the way the best kind of people wait. Present without pressing, there without crowding. After a moment she straightened, wiped her face with the back of her hand, looked at her father with her jaw set and her eyes still bright. "We have to get back," she said. "The cattle won't manage themselves." Thomas laughed the same full laugh as before, and Eliza, despite everything, because of everything, laughed with him. The train west left Philadelphia on a Saturday morning. This time, Eliza was not reading documents. The satchel was closed at her feet, the work done, the crisis resolved, and for the first time since Silver Mesa, she had nothing that required her immediate attention. She wasn't sure what to do with that. She sat across from Caleb and looked out the window as the eastern cities gave way to the flatter land beyond them. The great middle of the country opening up the way it always did, like the world exhaling, and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. Still. She felt still. Not stopped, not empty, still in the way that moving water is still at its deepest. All the current running underneath, the life of it intact, but the surface finally quiet. "What are you thinking?" Caleb said. She looked at him. "That I don't know what I do when there isn't a fight." He considered that. "You start the next thing," he said. "The next thing," she said. "The cattle operation, the company rebuild, the breeding program, the spring grazing rotation." He counted them off without urgency. There's always a next thing on a ranch. The difference is, the next things are yours now. Not somebody else's emergency. Yours. She thought about that for a long time. "I want to relocate the company headquarters to Colorado," she said. He looked at her, slightly surprised. "The Philadelphia office will maintain some functions," she said. "But the core operation, the land development, the agricultural side, it belongs in Colorado. It belongs where the land is." She paused. "And I belong where the land is." "That's a significant decision," he said. "I know." "Your father agrees," she said. "I asked him last night after you went to bed. He said it's where the work is, and it's where his grandchildren will be, and that's enough for him." Caleb went very still. She felt it, the quality of his stillness, and looked at him. His expression was careful in the way it got when he was holding something that mattered very much. "His grandchildren," he said. She met his eyes directly. "I said what I said." A beat. "You could have mentioned that at some other point in the last 2 weeks," he said. "I'm mentioning it now," she said. Another beat. Longer. And then Caleb Carter, a man who had crossed 1,000 miles of unfamiliar country and walked into a room full of Eastern money and come out the other side still standing, looked at his wife across a train seat somewhere between Philadelphia and the life they were going back to, and smiled. Not the controlled, measured expression he gave the world, the real one, the one she'd seen only a handful of times, the one that changed his whole face and made him look younger and more unguarded than anything else he ever let show. "All right," he said. Colorado. Colorado, she said. And the train kept moving west, the way all good things eventually do, toward open ground, toward space, toward the particular quality of light that exists only at the edge of the frontier, where the sky is bigger than anything you've planned for, and the land goes on past everything you can see. And Caleb Carter, looking at his wife, looking out the window at all of it coming toward them, thought that he had no idea, not one clear idea, what the next year would look like. The breeding program, the new grazing rotation, the company rebuild, whatever came next, and the thing after that, and the long, ordinary, extraordinary work of a life shared with someone who matched you. He had no idea what any of it would look like. He couldn't wait to find out. Hector was at the Silver Mesa station when the train pulled in. He was leaning against the post at the platform edge, with his hat tilted and his arms crossed. And when Caleb stepped down and then turned to offer Eliza his hand,
This story was
as she
posted on the
stepped down
channel
after
The
him,
Rusty Saddle.
Hector
Please do not
watched it.
repost it in any
watched
form.
the ease of it, the unconscious fluency of two people who have learned each other, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Ranch is still standing." "I expected it to be," Caleb said. "Cattle are all accounted for. Grass in the east pasture is coming in thicker. Creek came up 3 inches while you were gone. Rain up north." He looked at Eliza. "Welcome home, Mrs. Carter." Eliza looked at him. Something in the way he said it, not Miss Whitmore, not ma'am, but Mrs. Carter, the way a man says a name when he means it, made her stand a little straighter. "Thank you, Hector," she said. He picked up their bags without being asked and started toward the wagon. Caleb fell into step beside Eliza. "Ready?" he said. She looked at the town ahead of them, the familiar street, the general store, the small church at the end of the road where 4 weeks ago they had stood before a reverend neither of them had known well, and made promises neither of them had taken lightly. "More than ready," she said. They walked into Silver Mesa together, side by side, neither of them leading and neither of them following. And behind them the train sighed and settled, and the platform emptied, and the evening light came down long and gold over the Colorado mountains, and everything that needed to happen had happened, and everything that was going to begin was just ahead, and the ground under their feet was solid and real and entirely their own. The first thing Eliza did when she got back to Hollow Creek was walk every inch of the property, alone. Not to assess it, not to calculate or plan or measure. She'd done enough of that. She walked it the way you walk something that belongs to you, slowly, without urgency, letting the land remind her that it was real, that it was still there, that the months of fighting had not cost her the thing she'd been fighting for. Caleb watched her go from the porch of the main house and didn't follow. Hector appeared beside him with 2 cups of coffee, handed one over, and said, "She needs to remember why." "Yeah," Caleb said. They drank their coffee in silence and watched her move through the far pasture, and the morning was cold enough that her breath made small clouds in the air around her. And the grass she walked through, the same grass that had been cracked brown when she first arrived, was coming in green now, thin but real, pushing up through the October ground like it had decided to prove something. When she came back, her boots were wet and her cheeks were red from the cold, and she looked more settled than she had in weeks. "The east pasture," she said. "Hector said the grass came in thicker." "It did," Caleb said. "The rotation worked." "It worked," he said. She took the coffee he offered her, his own, which he hadn't started yet, and held it in both hands and looked out at the land. "I want to expand the breeding program in the spring," she said. "The Herefords did better than the projections. If we bring in 2 more bulls from the strain we looked at in October, we can increase the herd size by 30% without overgrazing." "I was thinking the same thing," he said. "And I want to talk to Tom Rafferty about partnering on the grain side. He's got the storage capacity we don't have, and we've got the grazing rotation he doesn't. It's a natural fit." "Also been thinking about that." She looked at him sideways. "You've been thinking about a lot while I was in Boston." "I had a lot of evenings alone," he said. She handed him back the coffee. "You should have the ranch then. I'll take the company end." "That was always the arrangement," he said. "No," she said. "Before, I was running both because I didn't trust the arrangement. Now I'm running both because I haven't let myself stop." She paused. "That's different. And I need to stop doing the second one." Caleb looked at her. "You're telling me to let you handle the ranch operations," he said. "I'm telling you to handle them with me," she said. "Not for me, with me. Like we did before Boston, before the lawyers and the documents and all of it." He thought about it, nodded once. "All right," he said. "Starting now?" "Starting now," she said. And they went to work. October turned into November with a particular speed that busy seasons have. Not fast in the way that empty time is fast, but fast in the way that full time is fast, where you look up and 2 weeks have gone by, and you can account for every hour of them and still can't quite believe it's already Thursday. The Hereford rotation settled into its new pattern. The partnership with Rafferty took one hard conversation. Tom Rafferty was a man who needed to feel that an agreement was his idea before he'd commit to it fully, and Eliza had figured that out in about 10 minutes and handled it accordingly, letting him steer the conversation to the conclusion she'd already planned, while Caleb watched with a quiet appreciation of a man watching someone do something difficult look easy. "You let him think he negotiated the grain storage terms," Caleb said afterward. "He did negotiate them," she said. "He just negotiated them in the direction I'd already decided they should go." "Is that different?" "It's completely different," she said. "He got what he wanted. I got what I needed. Nobody left that table feeling managed." Caleb thought about that. "You should teach a class." "I'll add it to the list," she said. The list, at that point, included finalizing the company restructure, setting up the new Colorado office for Whitmore Agricultural Partners, coordinating with the Philadelphia staff about the transition, managing the incoming correspondence from 3 other Colorado ranchers who had heard about the Hollow Creek recovery and wanted to discuss the breeding program, and planning the trip Thomas Whitmore was making west for Christmas. His doctor had cleared it reluctantly, with conditions, and Thomas had accepted the conditions, with the cheerful compliance of a man who intended to ignore at least 2 of them. And underneath all of it, the thing neither of them talked about directly, but both of them carried. The thing Thomas had named without ceremony in the Philadelphia study. The thing Eliza had said plainly on the train west, and then not mentioned again. His grandchildren. Caleb had not brought it up. Not because it didn't matter. It mattered enormously. But because he understood that Eliza had said it when she was ready to say it, and she would return to it when she was ready to return to it. And pushing before then would be exactly the wrong thing. He was learning, slowly and deliberately, the specific patience that Eliza Whitmore required. Not the patience of waiting for someone to catch up, the patience of trusting that someone knew when they were ready. It was the hardest and the most worthwhile thing he had ever practiced. The letter from Marcus Hawthorne arrived on a Tuesday. It was addressed to Eliza, in a handwriting that was careful, in the way of someone who has written something several times and finally sent the version they were least ashamed of. Caleb was in the barn when she read it. She came out to find him 20 minutes later, folded the letter in her coat pocket, and stood in the barn doorway for a moment without speaking. "Marcus," he said, not a question. "Yes." She pulled the letter out and handed it to him. He read it. It was an apology, not the lawyer-crafted, liability-conscious kind. The real kind. the kind that costs the person writing it more than they get back from sending it. Marcus Hawthorne wrote about the amendment to the yield projections with the clear-eyed accountability of someone who had spent a long time looking at what he'd done and had stopped finding ways to make it smaller than it was. He wrote about Eliza with a respect that hadn't been in his voice the one time Caleb had heard him mentioned. And at the end, he wrote, "I convinced myself that the result I wanted justified the method I chose. I know now that it doesn't. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say that clearly, to you, directly, without a lawyer between us." Caleb folded it and handed it back. "What do you want to do with it?" he said. She thought for a moment. "Nothing," she said. "I don't need to respond. I don't need to forgive or not forgive. I just needed to know whether it was genuine." "Is it?" "Yes," she said, without hesitation. "It is." "How can you tell?" She put the letter back in her pocket. "Because he didn't ask for anything," she said. "Not forgiveness, not a reply, not even acknowledgement. He just told the truth and stopped." She paused. People who want something from an apology always leave a door open at the end. He closed the door. Caleb nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm glad it's done." "So am I," he said. And that was the last time either of them spoke of Marcus Hawthorne. Not because they forced the silence, but because it was genuinely over. And over, things don't need to keep being named. Thomas Whitmore arrived in Silver Mesa on the 22nd of December, 3 days before Christmas, on the afternoon train from Denver. He came with a nurse his doctor had insisted upon, a practical, good-humored woman named Clara, who had immediately made her opinion of train travel known, and then settled into it with professional adaptability. And 2 chunks that were clearly heavier than any sick man needed for a 2-week visit, which meant Thomas had been shopping. He looked better than Philadelphia. Not well, in the way that would be easy and simple and untrue, but better. The fear was gone from his face, and fear, Caleb had learned from his own father, takes a particular physical toll. It ages a person from the inside out, and its absence can reverse that aging in ways that medicine can't quite explain, but that everyone who loves someone recognizes immediately. Thomas stepped onto the Silver Mesa platform, looked at the mountains behind the town, breathed in the cold, clear air, and said, "Well, now I understand." Eliza hugged him with both arms and didn't let go for long enough that Clara tactfully looked the other way. Thomas shook Caleb's hand, looked him over, and said, "You look like someone who's been working." "I have been," Caleb said. "Good," Thomas said. "Idle men make bad husbands." He picked up his hat, which had been knocked slightly sideways in the hug, and settled it back on his head. "Show me this ranch." He spent 3 days at Hollow Creek before he said what he'd come to say. He spent those 3 days the way a man spends time when he knows it's finite and valuable. Not rushing, not performing, but being absolutely present for every hour of it. He rode out to the east pasture in the wagon with Hector, who decided within 4 minutes that he liked Thomas Whitmore, and expressed this opinion through the particular form of open directness he reserved for people he respected. He sat at the kitchen table in the evenings and listened to Eliza talk through the company restructure with the focused attention of someone reviewing his own life's work and finding it in good hands. He asked Caleb questions about the land, not polite questions but real ones, the questions of a man who wants to understand something properly. On the 3rd evening, he asked Caleb to walk with him. They walked the near pasture in the cold, their boots on the frozen ground, their breath making clouds. "She's happy," Thomas said. Caleb looked at him. "I don't mean that lightly," Thomas said. Eliza has been many things her whole life. Capable, determined, brilliant in ways that made it hard for people to keep up with her. He paused. But happy is not something she's managed easily. She sets the bar too high for herself. Always has. Gets to the end of a thing she's fought for and immediately starts measuring the distance to the next thing. He walked a few steps. She's not doing that. No, Caleb said. You did that, Thomas said. She did that, Caleb said. I know what you just, Thomas said firmly. Don't be modest. Be accurate. There's a difference. He stopped walking, turned to face Caleb in the cold dark. I want to ask you something, and I want a plain answer. All right, Caleb said. Are you happy? Caleb looked at him. The question was simple. The answer was simpler. Yes, he said. Thomas studied him for a moment. Good, he said. That's the only thing that matters. Everything else, the company, the ranch, all of it. Those are things people build. Happiness is what tells you whether you built them in the right direction. He started walking again. My wife and I had 40 years. They weren't all easy. Some of them were hard in ways I wouldn't wish on anyone. But I was happy. And so was she. And when she died, I had 40 years of that to hold on to. He paused. That's what I want for Eliza. Not success, not safety. 40 years of that. Caleb walked beside him and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, I'll do my best to give her more than 40. Thomas laughed quietly. That's the right answer, he said. That's exactly the right answer. Christmas came to Silver Mesa the way it came to frontier towns, without a great deal of ceremony, but with the particular warmth that small communities generate when they decide to celebrate something together. Agnes Beaumont organized the church gathering, which she did every year, and this year extended an invitation to the Hollow Creek Ranch households with the manner of someone extending an olive branch and pretending it had been in her hand all along. Caleb accepted for both of them with equal diplomacy. Tom Rafferty brought whiskey. Hector brought tamales that his grandmother had taught him to make and that were, by wide agreement, the best thing that happened to Silver Mesa every December. Clara the nurse turned out to have a remarkable singing voice, which nobody expected and everyone was glad of. Thomas Whitmore sat in the best chair by the fire and held court with a warmth and ease that had the whole room talking to him within an hour. Eliza stood next to Caleb in the crowded, warm, imperfect little church and watched it all. Watched her father laugh with Hector. Watched the town she had arrived in as a stranger fold itself around the people she loved, and felt something so full and complete that she couldn't quite find language for it. What? Caleb said, because he'd learned to read the particular quality of her silence. Nothing, she said. Then, everything. She looked at him. I came here with a plan, a very specific, very detailed plan that I'd worked out over months. I had contingencies for every scenario I could imagine. I know, he said. I didn't imagine you, she said. He looked at her. I mean that, she said. Not romantically, factually. I had planned for the drought, the investors, the debt structure, the timeline. I had not planned for a neighbor who showed up uninvited and told me I was using the wrong gauge fencing wire. She paused. I had not planned for someone who would stand in Hawthorne's boardroom and say the word seize like it was a simple fact, because to him it was. She held his gaze. I had not planned for a person who made me want to stop running the race alone. The noise of the gathering moved around them, warm and human and full. I hadn't planned for you either, he said. I went to town for medicine. I was going to be back in an hour. She smiled. The real one. The one that reached everything. Best delay of your life, she said. Without question, he said. January brought hard cold and the particular clarity that comes after holidays. The world returning to its working shape. The ordinary rhythm reasserting itself. The next season already visible on the horizon. Thomas went back to Philadelphia with Clara and 2 empty trunks, because he had left everything he brought with him. He embraced Eliza on the platform and held on for a long time. And when he let go, his eyes were bright, and hers were too, but neither of them drew attention to it, because they were both people who preferred to carry their emotions cleanly. He gripped Caleb's hand for the last time. Take care of her, he said. She takes care of herself, Caleb said. Same words as before, the same truth. Thomas smiled. I know, but be there while she does it. Every day, Caleb said. The train took him east, and Caleb and Eliza stood on the Silver Mesa platform and watched it go. The way you watch something you love move away from you when you know it's going somewhere it needs to be, and you can afford to let it go. The spring came in fast and green. The drought had finally, fully broken in February. 3 weeks of steady rain that brought the creek up and the grass in, and the whole valley shifting from brown to a living, breathing green that Caleb hadn't seen since before the hard years. The new bulls came in from the Denver auction in March. 2 of them, big, rangy animals that moved with the calm authority of cattle that had been well-bred and well-kept. And they settled into the Hollow Creek rotation with a smoothness that felt like confirmation of everything the plan had promised. Eliza stood at the fence and watched them move through the east pasture and said, 30%. Minimum, Caleb said. By fall. By fall, he agreed. She turned to look at him. The Philadelphia office signed the final transition documents yesterday. Everything moves to Colorado by June. Hector found us 3 more acres on the south side that Thomas Elkins never registered properly, Caleb said. It's ours if we file before April. We file before April, she said immediately. I thought you'd say that. You already started the paperwork. Last week, he said. She shook her head, the small, fond shake that meant she was pleased and didn't want to make too much of it. They stood at the fence in the March morning with the new cattle moving behind them and the creek running full and the mountains still carrying snow on their upper faces and the whole long season of work stretching ahead of them. Caleb, she said. Yeah? I'm going to need you to hire 2 more ranch hands by May. He looked at her. Then he understood what she wasn't saying directly, and the understanding moved through him like the first warmth of spring, sudden and real and entirely welcome. 2, he said. The operation is expanding, she said, perfectly neutral. We'll need the help. We will, he said. A beat. How are you feeling? He asked. Tired in the mornings, she said. Otherwise fine. She looked at him sidelong. Don't fuss. I won't fuss, he said. You're already fussing internally. Internally is allowed, he said. She turned fully to look at him then, the full, unguarded look she gave him now without the measuring caution that used to live underneath it. The look of a woman who had decided, completely and without reservation, that this man was someone she could be seen by. It's going to be a lot, she said. Yes, he said. The ranch, the company, all of it, and this on top. Eliza, he said. What? We handled Hawthorne, he said. We can handle a baby. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, That is the most reductive comparison anyone has ever made in the history of frontier ranching. Is it wrong? She pressed her lips together. No, she said. It's not wrong. He reached out and took her hand, the same hand she'd offered him at the beginning when they'd made their first agreement. The hand that had shaken his over equal footing and signed documents in conference rooms and held his through the dark on a train moving west. He held it now in the cold March morning, and she held his back, and neither of them said anything for a while. The cattle moved in the pasture, the creek ran, the mountains stood. And the life they had built, not the one either of them had planned, not the one the circumstances had tried to force on them, but the one they had chosen, deliberately and stubbornly and with their eyes open, spread out in every direction around them, solid and growing and real. That evening, Hector built a fire in the Hollow Creek house, and they ate dinner around the kitchen table. Hector and Caleb and Eliza, and the particular comfortable silence of people who have worked hard together and are resting in it. And afterward, Eliza sat with her account books while Caleb read, and Hector did whatever Hector did at the end of the day. And the fire settled, and the night pressed in, and the house made its sounds of warmth and shelter. At some point, Eliza set down her pencil. She looked at Caleb across the table. "Funny," she said. "I came west to save a company." He looked up at her. "And ended up saving your life," he said. She tilted her head. "I was going to say something different." "What were you going to say?" She thought for a moment. "I was going to say I came west to save a company," she said, "and found out that the saving was never the point. The point was what you build after." She paused. "The point is always what you build after." He set down his book. "And what are we building?" he said. She looked at him, at the man who had stepped toward her on a dusty train platform when every sensible instinct told him to stay put, who had shown up on her land with his breeding records and his honest eyes and his refusal to let her be alone in a fight that wasn't his, who had stood in marble-floored rooms and spoken plain truth until the marble cracked, who was sitting across from her right now in a kitchen that smelled like wood smoke and good cooking, and the particular smell of a house that is genuinely lived in. "Everything," she said. And that word, simple, complete, absolute, settled into the warm air of the Hollow Creek house and filled it, the way only true things fill a room. Because some people spend their whole lives waiting to be found by the right story. And some people are brave enough to step toward it when it appears. On a dusty platform in the summer of 1879, in the space of a single second, in the meeting of two pairs of eyes that recognized something neither of them had language for yet. Caleb Carter had taken one step forward, and that one step had built everything. Some loves don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with certainty or comfort or the knowledge of what they're going to cost. They arrive on crowded platforms in the last light of summer, and they ask only one thing of you. Don't look away. Caleb Carter hadn't looked away, and the life that grew from that single, stubborn act of attention was proof of the oldest truth the frontier ever taught, that the ground doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you're willing to stay and build. And these two, a quiet cowboy who had learned to hold on, and a fierce woman who had finally learned to let someone, had stayed, and they had built, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.